Have you ever woken up with a sense of dread? Your mind immediately goes into overdrive, thinking about everything that could go wrong. It's like your brain is stuck on the worst-case scenario. What if today is just more of the same? What if you could stop this cycle of negativity? What if, instead of feeling overwhelmed, you could wake up with a sense of calm and control? What if you could stop the spiral before it even starts and turn your day into something productive? This is exactly what we're going to explore today. How to stop your mind from running wild and control your thoughts before they control you. Negative thinking may feel normal, but it's not the way things have to be. You can change it. But let's be real. Life is hard when you don't know how to control your thoughts. If you let negativity dictate your day, you'll find yourself stuck, waiting for the next problem to show up. You'll miss out on opportunities because your mind is clouded by fear. Here's the thing, your mind is powerful. It can create incredible things, but it can also trap you in cycles of worry, doubt, and anxiety. If you don't take charge, those negative thoughts can become the story of your life. And nobody wants that. So, what if I told you that you could flip the script? What if you could start turning those negative thoughts into something positive, productive, and even fun? Imagine the freedom in having the power to switch gears, no matter what's going on around you. The key to changing your mindset is simple but powerful: awareness. The first step is recognizing when negative thoughts show up. It might sound easy, but it's the hardest part. When you're trapped in a cycle of worry, your brain doesn't always let you see a way out. But here's the good news. Once you spot a negative thought, you can interrupt it. You don't have to let it take over. In that moment, you can choose to replace it with a thought that serves you better, one that moves you forward instead of keeping you stuck. Let's put it into action. Next time you feel a wave of negativity, stop and breathe. Think about a positive alternative. For example, instead of thinking, "I'll fail today," try thinking, "I'll give it my best," and that's enough. It's a small shift, but it makes all the difference. Now, here's the challenge. You have to practice this every day. Your mind is used to being on autopilot, and it's easy to let it run wild. But with consistent practice, you can start to change the direction of your thoughts and create a new habit of positivity. Every time you replace a negative thought with a positive one, you're building a new mental muscle. It might feel awkward at first, but soon, it'll become second nature. Your mind will start to look for the positive, and before long, it'll be the default. You won't be perfect. Some days will be harder than others, but that's okay. The key is to keep going. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. Each step you take toward a more positive mindset brings you closer to the life you want to live. And here's the best part. When you master your thoughts, everything else becomes easier. You'll feel more confident, less stressed, and more in control of your life. No more letting negative thoughts hold you back. It's time to take charge. So what's the first step? It's simple. Start noticing your thoughts. Every time a negative thought pops up, challenge it. Choose to replace it with something positive. Keep practicing, and watch how your life starts to change. The first day of trying to stop negative thoughts wasn't easy. Jack felt like a fish out of water. Every time he tried to turn a "what if" into a positive, his brain fought back. It was like trying to swim against the current. But Jack didn't give up. He remembered what he'd learned. Every small change counts. So, when his mind went down the path of doubt again, he paused. He took a deep breath and replaced the thought, "I can't do this," with, "I'm learning and improving every day." It wasn't perfect, but Jack felt a shift. Instead of the usual spiral into self-criticism, he was taking control. Slowly, his thoughts began to change. He realized that even small victories in his mindset could have a big impact on his life. At work, Jack found himself facing a challenge. He was in a meeting and a new project was presented. His first thought? I'll mess it up. I'm not good enough for this. But this time he caught it. He didn't let the negative thought spiral. He interrupted it. No, I can do this, he told himself. And you know what? He did. Jack presented his ideas with confidence, even though he wasn't sure they were perfect. Instead of fearing failure, he embraced it as part of the process. The more he practiced, the more confident he felt. The more positive thoughts replaced the negative ones. Later that day, Jack caught himself in another negative thought. I'm not making progress fast enough. But instead of letting that thought pull him down, he took a moment to reflect. He'd made progress. He was different than yesterday. And that was enough. That evening, Jack sat down to write in his journal, something he'd started doing to track his mindset. Today was hard, but I didn't let it control me, he wrote. Small changes, small wins. Tomorrow, I'll do the same. It felt good to reflect on his progress. He realized that this journey wasn't about perfection. It was about consistency. It was about showing up every day, even when it felt hard. It was about making the choice to be a little better than yesterday. When Jack woke up the next morning, he didn't immediately reach for his phone to check his emails or social media. He stayed in bed for a few minutes and took a few deep breaths. Today, I'll be present. Today, I'll focus on what I can control, he thought. By focusing on the small wins, Jack noticed that the negative thoughts weren't as loud as before. They were still there, but they didn't take up as much space in his mind. The more he practiced, the easier it became to turn his mindset around. He wasn't the same person he was a week ago. He had learned to stop negative thoughts before they took control, and the effects were starting to show. His confidence was growing, his energy was shifting, and he was taking action instead of waiting for things to happen. Jack knew he still had a long way to go, but today was a victory. And tomorrow, he would keep moving forward, one small step at a time. It was a Thursday morning, and Jack had a big presentation at work. As usual, his mind jumped straight to the worst-case scenario. What if I forget everything? What if they don't like my ideas? What if I look foolish? The negative thoughts rushed in, loud and fast. But Jack had learned something important. These thoughts didn't define him. He had the power to choose how to respond. So, instead of spiraling, he took a deep breath and reminded himself, I'm prepared. I've done the work. I've got this. It wasn't the first time Jack had faced fear or self-doubt, but this time, it felt different. His mind wasn't as quick to panic. He could feel the shift. The negative thoughts still came, but now he had a way to push them aside and focus on the present. As he stood in front of the conference room, his palms were sweaty and his heart raced. This is it, he thought. I've got one chance to make a good impression. No pressure. He cracked a smile at the thought. He was learning to laugh at his fears, rather than letting them control him. When he started speaking, the nerves were still there, but they didn't take over. Jack focused on his breathing and his message. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was just trying to be present. He didn't wait for everything to be just right. He moved forward anyway. And something surprising happened. The room responded. His colleagues engaged with his ideas, asked questions, and offered feedback. Jack felt the weight of his own doubts start to lift. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and that was enough. That was progress. By the end of the meeting, Jack felt a wave of relief. It wasn't as hard as he had imagined. Sure, there were areas he could improve, but the thought of messing up no longer paralyzed him. He had learned that imperfection wasn't a reason to stop. It was a reason to keep going. That evening, Jack reflected on the experience. I still have room to grow, but I took action, he thought. He was learning that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The key wasn't avoiding fear. It was learning to move through it with confidence. He realized that embracing discomfort was a part of growth. It was easy to stay in the safe zone, to avoid situations that made him nervous. But growth only happened when he pushed himself past that zone. The discomfort wasn't a signal to stop. It was a sign that he was on the right track. Jack thought about the people he admired most. Successful people who didn't shy away from challenges, who faced fear and did it anyway. They weren't immune to doubt. They had just learned how to act in spite of it. That was what Jack wanted to learn too. He was starting to see that the fear didn't go away. It just became easier to face. And every time he faced it, he grew a little stronger. He was learning to trust himself and his ability to handle whatever came his way, no matter how uncomfortable. The next morning, Jack woke up with a different mindset. Instead of dreading the day, he looked forward to the challenges. What will I face today? He wondered. How will I grow today? The journey wasn't easy, but Jack was learning to embrace it, one uncomfortable step at a time. The next few days were harder than expected. Jack had made great strides, but the universe seemed to throw one obstacle after another in his path. From a miscommunication at work to a canceled meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of control. His mind quickly defaulted to the usual negative patterns. I knew it. I can't do this. Why is everything falling apart? But then, something new happened. Instead of letting the negative thoughts take over, Jack took a moment to pause and ask himself, what can I learn from this? He remembered something he'd heard. Setbacks are setups for comebacks. It was a cliché, but in that moment, it felt powerful. Instead of seeing the mistakes as failures, Jack began to view them as opportunities for growth. He started asking, what's the lesson here? What can I do differently next time? The work issue was quickly resolved when Jack decided to communicate more clearly and set boundaries with his colleagues. The canceled meeting, instead of making him feel defeated, became a chance for him to focus on other projects that had been neglected. It was a moment of realization. Setbacks weren't the end of the world. They were just temporary detours. Later that night, Jack sat down with his journal, reflecting on the day. I didn't let it break me, he wrote. I saw the setbacks as opportunities to improve, not as proof that I'm failing. Today wasn't perfect, but I'm learning. Jack realized something important. Perfection wasn't the goal. Progress was. It was easy to get caught up in the idea that every step had to be flawless, but he now understood that mistakes were part of the process. Every time he fell, he could get back up stronger. Every misstep was a lesson learned. The next morning, Jack had a new mindset. Instead of waking up with dread, he woke up with curiosity. What will today bring? He thought. How will I grow today? He no longer saw challenges as threats, but as opportunities to prove to himself that he could handle whatever came his way. At work, Jack had another challenge. This time, a project was running behind schedule. In the past, he would have stressed out, blaming himself for not being fast enough. But this time, he looked at the situation with a clear mind. What can I do to move things forward? He asked. He immediately took action. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or perfect conditions, Jack took small steps to get things moving. He prioritized the most important tasks and delegated the rest. He learned that sometimes the best way to handle a setback was to act quickly and keep moving, even if it wasn't perfect. The day was far from easy, but Jack felt empowered. He wasn't letting the obstacles control him anymore. With each challenge, he was learning to become more adaptable more resilient. He realized that success wasn't about avoiding setbacks. It was about learning how to navigate them with confidence. By the end of the day, Jack felt proud. The project wasn't finished, but it was back on track. He had taken ownership of his mistakes, learned from them, and kept going. In the past, he would have let setbacks knock him down, but today he had proven to himself that he could handle anything. That night, as Jack prepared for bed, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't perfect, and he never would be. But that was okay. What mattered was that he was getting better every day. And tomorrow, he would face whatever came his way with the same mindset. Progress, not perfection. Jack woke up feeling the weight of a new challenge ahead. He'd spent the past few weeks making progress, but something had shifted in his mindset. He no longer wanted instant results. He wanted growth. Real growth, which took time and patience. The past few days had been filled with small wins, replacing negative thoughts, acting in spite of fear, and facing setbacks head-on. But Jack knew it wasn't enough to expect immediate success. Change wasn't a quick fix. It was a long, steady process. And that was okay. As he sat down to his morning coffee, Jack thought about his journey so far. It's easy to get discouraged when results don't come fast enough, he reflected. But real change takes time. He remembered the first time he'd started practicing positive thinking. It had felt awkward, almost forced. But now, it was part of his daily routine. What Jack had realized was that the most important thing wasn't seeing instant results. It was the consistency. Showing up every day, no matter how small the steps, was what made the difference. In the past, he would have given up if he didn't see results immediately. But now, he was learning to trust the process. At work, Jack had another tough day. The project he'd been working on wasn't moving as quickly as he hoped. His mind started to race with doubts again. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe this is taking too long. But instead of spiraling into negativity, Jack paused and reminded himself, this is just part of the process. He decided not to rush. Instead of stressing over the slow progress, Jack focused on taking small, consistent steps. He broke the project down into manageable tasks, tackled each one with focus, and resisted the urge to worry about how long it was taking. By the afternoon, Jack felt a sense of relief. He hadn't finished the project yet, but he had made progress. He could see the results of his steady work, even if they weren't as immediate as he wanted. For the first time in a while, he felt proud of the process itself, not just the outcome. That night, Jack reflected on his day in his journal. He wrote, I didn't need instant results to feel accomplished today. I trusted the process, stayed consistent, and kept moving forward. That's enough for now. He smiled at the realization. He was learning that success didn't happen overnight. The next morning, Jack set his intentions for the day with a renewed sense of patience. It's not about rushing through life. It's about enjoying the journey, he thought. He no longer felt the pressure to have everything figured out immediately. He trusted that, over time, his efforts would pay off. As the days went on, Jack's confidence grew. He still faced challenges, but he now understood that no challenge was insurmountable. He didn't need to see immediate results to know he was on the right path. The key was to stay consistent, stay focused, and trust that growth was happening, even if it wasn't always visible. Jack knew that there would be times when he would feel frustrated. He knew that sometimes it would feel like nothing was changing. But he also knew that these moments were just part of the journey. Growth was never linear. It had its ups and downs, but every step forward, no matter how small, was progress. At the end of the week, Jack felt a sense of peace. The project wasn't finished, but it was closer to completion than it had been before. More importantly, he had learned to trust the process, and that made all the difference. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. He was enjoying the ride. It was one of those mornings when Jack felt like he could take on the world. He had been making consistent progress. His mindset was stronger. His confidence was growing. But there was still one thing that held him back: fear. Fear of failing, of not being good enough, and of making mistakes. For days, Jack had been pushing himself to face his fears, but today, it felt different. He had to present a new proposal to his team, a proposal that he wasn't entirely sure about. What if they don't like it? What if I miss something important? His mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. But Jack had come a long way since those early days of spiraling into self-doubt. Instead of letting fear take over, he took a deep breath and reminded himself, fear is just a feeling. It doesn't control me. I control it. It was a small shift, but it made all the difference. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. At the meeting, Jack felt the familiar anxiety creeping in, but he didn't let it paralyze him. He walked up to the front of the room with confidence, even though his heart was racing. I'm not perfect, and that's okay, he thought. What matters is that I'm doing my best. When he began speaking, the words flowed more easily than he expected. Sure, there were moments when he stumbled or lost his train of thought, but instead of getting flustered, Jack smiled and continued. His team responded positively to his proposal, and even though there were some suggestions for improvement, Jack felt proud of what he had achieved. After the meeting, Jack felt a sense of relief. He had faced his fear head-on and survived. The proposal wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. And most importantly, he hadn't let fear hold him back. He was learning to take action despite his doubts, and that was a huge victory. Later that day, Jack reflected on the experience. Fear doesn't go away, but it doesn't control me either, he wrote in his journal. I can feel the fear, acknowledge it, and still move forward. I've done it before, and I can do it again. The more Jack faced his fears, the more he realized that the fear of failure was often worse than the failure itself. Every time he pushed through, the fear lessened. He understood now that making mistakes wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign that he was trying. It was part of the journey. Jack's next challenge came the following week when he had to lead a project with a tight deadline. The pressure was on, and again, the fear crept in. What if I mess up? What if the team doesn't listen to me? But Jack didn't let the fear take hold. He knew that the only way to grow was to face the challenge, no matter how intimidating it seemed. He walked into the office with a new mindset. Fear wasn't his enemy. It was his signal to step up. Throughout the project, Jack kept reminding himself, I can handle this. I've handled things before. And even when things got stressful, he kept moving forward, step by step. By the end of the project, Jack felt accomplished. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. He had faced his fear, led his team, and learned valuable lessons along the way. The experience reinforced his belief that the only way to conquer fear was to face it head-on. That night, Jack sat in his living room, reflecting on the day. He wasn't afraid of fear anymore. He understood that fear was a part of life, an indicator that he was pushing his limits, growing, and becoming more resilient. And that made all the difference. Jack woke up feeling the usual buzz of excitement and anxiety. He had been making progress, no doubt. But the one thing that still haunted him was the idea of perfection. It was easy to feel like he needed everything to be flawless, that if he didn't get it just right, it would all fall apart. His fear of failure had lessened, but the need for perfection was still there. He wasn't just worried about making mistakes. He was terrified of making the wrong choice, of slipping back into old habits. What if I mess up today? Jack thought, as he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. But then something clicked. He smiled at himself. What if I don't? The realization hit him hard. Perfection wasn't the goal. Perfection was a trap. It wasn't about doing everything right. It was about doing something. Anything. Progress, not perfection, was the key to moving forward. Jack had been so focused on getting it perfect that he had missed the point of learning. He was allowed to fail. He was allowed to make mistakes. And that was okay. At work, Jack had a new project, a big one. The old Jack would have been paralyzed by the idea that it had to be perfect. But this time, he took a different approach. Instead of overthinking every detail, he just started. He took a deep breath, broke the project into smaller tasks, and tackled them one at a time. He was no longer trying to be flawless. He was trying to be consistent. Each small step mattered more than the outcome. He realized that, in the past, he had avoided failure by doing nothing. But now, he understood, failure wasn't the enemy. Inaction was. Throughout the day, Jack felt the weight of his old perfectionism slowly lifting. He wasn't perfect, and that was fine. He had learned that failing didn't mean he was a failure. It meant he was growing. And growth meant making mistakes, learning from them, and trying again. Later that afternoon, Jack had a difficult conversation with a colleague. He used to dread moments like this, fearful that he would say the wrong thing, or that the conversation would go poorly. But today was different. He didn't expect perfection. He just expected honesty. And when the conversation didn't go as planned, he didn't beat himself up about it. Instead, Jack reflected on the situation. What can I learn from this? He thought. How can I do better next time? He knew that each conversation, no matter how uncomfortable, was a step forward. And with each experience, he was learning how to handle the unpredictable nature of life. That night, Jack sat down with his journal. Today wasn't perfect, he wrote, but it was real. I showed up, I did the work, and I learned. That's enough for now. As he closed the journal, he felt a sense of peace. The pressure to be perfect had faded, and in its place was a sense of freedom. The freedom to be himself, flaws and all. The next morning, Jack's routine felt different. He didn't wake up expecting everything to go perfectly. Instead, he woke up with a quiet sense of excitement. Today will be a day of progress, he thought. I'm not chasing perfection. I'm chasing growth. At the office, Jack continued to focus on consistency over perfection. Each task he completed, each step forward, was a victory. He wasn't measuring his success by how flawless everything was, but by how much he had learned and grown. And with that mindset, he felt more empowered than ever. By the end of the week, Jack realized that the pressure of perfection had been a self-imposed prison. He was free now, not because everything was perfect, but because he had finally accepted that imperfection was a part of life. And that was something to embrace. It was a Friday afternoon when Jack hit a wall. The past few weeks had been a blur of hard work, new projects, and constant improvement. But something was off. He felt exhausted, not physically, but mentally. The pressure of constantly pushing himself had started to take a toll. He had learned so much about managing his thoughts, overcoming fear, and embracing imperfection. But what he hadn't fully realized was how much he needed to take care of his mind and body. His constant drive for progress had left little time for rest or relaxation. And now, his mind was screaming for a break. That night, Jack sat on his couch, staring at his phone. He had become so used to being busy, to constantly checking emails and social media, that he didn't know how to just be anymore. The thought of sitting still felt strange. I need a break, he thought, but the pressure to keep going gnawed at him. What if I stop now? What if I'm falling behind? But then, he remembered something he had read. You can't pour from an empty cup. If he didn't take care of himself, he wouldn't be able to continue improving or facing challenges with the same energy. It was time to prioritize his well-being. The next day, Jack decided to unplug. He turned off his phone, put away his work, and gave himself permission to rest. He took a long walk in the park, letting the fresh air clear his mind. He found himself slowing down, listening to the sounds around him, and simply appreciating the moment. As he walked, Jack reflected on the past few months. He had been so focused on growth and progress that he had forgotten the importance of balance. Pushing himself to the limit was not sustainable, and he was starting to feel the consequences of neglecting his own needs. When Jack returned home, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. It was a simple act, just taking time to rest, but it had a profound effect on his mind. He realized that he didn't have to constantly be doing something to make progress. In fact, sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is nothing. Jack spent the rest of the weekend focusing on activities that helped him recharge, reading, cooking a nice meal, and spending time with friends. It wasn't about being productive. It was about finding a balance between work and rest, effort and relaxation. As the week began, Jack felt more grounded. He wasn't running on empty anymore. He had learned that while pushing for progress was important, so was taking the time to restore and refresh. He no longer saw rest as a luxury, but as a necessity for long-term success. At work, Jack felt more focused and energized. He was tackling his tasks with a clearer mind and more creativity. Instead of rushing through everything, he was able to be present, making better decisions, and feeling more confident in his abilities. Balance was the key. Jack knew that this wasn't a one-time fix. Maintaining balance would be an ongoing practice, something he needed to check in with regularly. But for the first time in a while, he felt like he could breathe. He wasn't just chasing progress for the sake of it. He was living his life fully, in all its ups and downs. As he sat down that night to journal, Jack wrote, "Today was about balance. It wasn't about doing everything right or perfect, but about doing what I needed to feel whole. Progress doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to pause." It had been a month since Jack started practicing balance, and things were going well. He felt more energized and focused. However, as the demands of his job increased, he began to notice something he hadn't considered: the pressure to say yes to everything. Emails, meetings, extra tasks. Jack was suddenly juggling more than he could handle. The old Jack would have pushed through it all, trying to be the helpful, hard-working employee who never said no. But the new Jack was different. He had learned that saying yes to everything wasn't a sign of strength. It was a path to burnout. One afternoon, his manager asked him to take on an additional project, one that wasn't urgent, but would require a lot of time. Jack felt the familiar pressure to say yes. It's just one more task, he thought. I can handle it. But then, he remembered what he'd learned. If he kept overloading himself, he wouldn't have the energy for the things that truly mattered. So, Jack decided to do something he'd never done before. He set a boundary. Instead of immediately agreeing, he said, "I'd love to help, but I'm currently working on other high-priority tasks. Let's see if we can find someone else who can take this on." He felt a wave of discomfort. Saying no felt almost unnatural, but deep down, he knew it was the right choice. The moment passed, but Jack was surprised at how powerful it felt to assert his limits. For so long, He had believed that saying yes to everything made him indispensable. But now, he realized that it only drained his energy and left him feeling overwhelmed. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was essential for maintaining his well-being and productivity. Later that day, Jack took a moment to reflect. I'm not afraid to say no anymore, he thought. In fact, saying no is helping me say yes to the things that truly matter. He understood now that boundaries weren't just about protecting his time. They were about protecting his mental and emotional energy. At home, Jack continued to apply the same mindset. He had always said yes to social plans, even when he felt exhausted. But now, he was learning to say no when he needed rest. I love spending time with friends, but tonight, I need to recharge, he told one friend. Instead of feeling guilty, Jack felt relieved. He was finally prioritizing his own needs without the fear of disappointing others. By the end of the week, Jack noticed a significant shift. He had more time for his work, more energy for his personal life, and most importantly, he felt less stressed. Setting boundaries had not only improved his productivity, but it had also allowed him to show up more fully in every area of his life. Jack understood that boundaries were a form of self-respect. They weren't about being rigid or unkind. They were about knowing his limits and protecting his energy. Without boundaries, he couldn't give his best to anything, work, relationships, or even himself. That weekend, Jack spent the day doing things he loved, without feeling rushed or overwhelmed. He had learned that boundaries weren't just a way to say no. They were a way to say yes to the life he wanted to live. He was taking control of his time, his energy, and his happiness. As he sat down to reflect on his week, Jack wrote, "Setting boundaries isn't about being perfect. It's about respecting yourself enough to protect your peace. Saying no doesn't make me less capable. It makes me more present, more focused, and more fulfilled." Jack had come a long way. He had faced fears, set boundaries, and learned to embrace imperfection. But one thing still held him back: his belief in his own abilities. He had made progress, but did he truly believe in himself? Every time Jack took on a new challenge, self-doubt whispered in the back of his mind. What if I'm not good enough? What if they find out I'm not as capable as they think I am? It was a familiar feeling, one he couldn't shake. But Jack had learned to recognize these thoughts for what they were, just thoughts. They didn't define him. He realized that confidence wasn't about knowing everything or being perfect. It was about trusting himself, flaws and all. One morning, Jack stood in front of the mirror and repeated something he had heard a long time ago: "I am enough." It felt awkward at first, but the more he said it, the more it started to sink in. Confidence was a habit, not a trait. At work, Jack faced a difficult decision. He had the opportunity to take the lead on a major project, but his first instinct was to say no. What if I mess up? What if I don't have the answers? But instead of backing away, he decided to step up. I can do this, Jack thought. I have the skills, I've learned, and I'm capable of figuring things out along the way. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about trusting his abilities and being willing to take risks, even when things were uncertain. Jack took on the project, and while it wasn't without challenges, he tackled each task with confidence. He didn't wait for perfection or certainty. Instead, he trusted his intuition and took action, learning and growing as he went along. By the end of the project, Jack felt a surge of pride. It wasn't flawless, but he had done it. He had trusted himself enough to take on something big, and he had shown up every day with the belief that he could handle whatever came his way. Jack realized that self-doubt wasn't something that disappeared overnight. But every time he acted despite it, he built a little more confidence. With each challenge, his trust in himself grew stronger, and with it, his ability to take risks. As he sat in his office that afternoon, reflecting on his progress, Jack smiled. He wasn't perfect, but he was confident. Confidence wasn't about having all the answers. It was about believing in your ability to find them, no matter what. Jack understood now that confidence was a skill that grew with time, experience, and the courage to face challenges head-on. It wasn't something that magically appeared. It was something he had to create for himself every day. By the end of the week, Jack had made more progress than he ever expected. His confidence wasn't built on perfection or avoiding failure. It was built on trusting himself, taking action, and embracing every part of the journey. That evening, Jack wrote in his journal, "Confidence isn't about being perfect. It's about trusting myself enough to take risks, even when I'm not sure. I am enough, and I am capable of handling whatever comes my way." As Jack looked back over the past few months, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had come so far. He had faced his fears, built confidence, set boundaries, and learned the value of balance. But there was still one question on his mind. What now? For so long, Jack had been focused on growth, on improving himself and overcoming challenges. But now, he realized that the journey wasn't just about what he could do next. It was about acknowledging how far he had already come. He spent the morning reflecting on the small victories, the times he faced fear and pushed through, the moments he chose progress over perfection, and the times he trusted himself despite self-doubt. Every step had been a learning opportunity, a chance to grow. Jack didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. He had learned that life wasn't about reaching a final destination. It was about embracing the process, continuing to grow, adapt, and learn, no matter where he was in his journey. The key was to keep moving forward. There had been moments when Jack felt overwhelmed, when progress seemed slow, and when he doubted himself. But looking back now, he could see how those moments had shaped him. Each challenge had been an opportunity to learn something new about himself. He realized that self-reflection was a vital part of growth. It wasn't just about pushing harder or faster. It was about taking the time to look inward and recognize how far he had come. It was about celebrating his wins, no matter how small they seemed at the time. In his journal, Jack wrote, "I've come so far, but I'm just getting started. The journey doesn't stop here. I will keep growing, learning, and pushing forward. I am proud of what I've achieved, but I know there's more to discover about myself." Later that day, Jack reflected on how much he had learned about resilience. He now understood that life wasn't about avoiding failure or discomfort. It was about learning how to handle them, how to keep moving forward even when things got tough. And that made all the difference. Jack wasn't the same person he had been when he started. He had become more self-aware, more confident, and more resilient. The challenges that once felt impossible now seemed like stepping stones, each one bringing him closer to the person he wanted to be. That evening, Jack took a long walk, letting his thoughts wander. He thought about the future, about what he wanted to accomplish next. But instead of feeling pressure, he felt excitement. The future was full of possibilities, and he was ready for whatever came next. As he walked, Jack thought about the one thing that had made the biggest difference in his journey: persistence. It wasn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It was about showing up every day, even when things felt difficult, and continuing to move forward. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that each one was just another opportunity to grow. And no matter what, he would always keep moving forward, one step at a time. Jack stood by the window, gazing at the city lights, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't experienced before. The journey had been long, full of ups and downs, but he had made it through. Today, he realized, wasn't about looking back, it was about moving forward. The past few months had been about growth, self-discovery, and pushing through fears. But now Jack had reached a point where he understood that his journey wasn't a destination. The process of becoming better, stronger, and wiser was ongoing. For a long time, Jack had been focused on the next step. He was always striving for more, thinking he had to achieve something big to feel complete. But now, he realized that progress wasn't about waiting for the big moment. It was about embracing the small wins every day. Each step he had taken, no matter how small, had been part of a bigger picture. And now, with more clarity than ever, he understood that his future wasn't something to fear. It was something to look forward to, with excitement and purpose. He was ready for whatever came next. Jack knew the challenges ahead wouldn't be easy. Life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. But now, he had the tools to handle whatever came his way. Fear and self-doubt no longer held the same power over him. He had learned to move past them. He had learned that growth didn't always happen in a straight line. Sometimes, it felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that was okay. What mattered was persistence, showing up for himself every single day, even when things didn't go as planned. With each challenge, Jack had learned more about resilience. He had come to understand that it wasn't about avoiding difficulties. It was about learning to deal with them. And even when things didn't go perfectly, he knew he had the ability to get back up and keep going. Jack had also learned to be patient with himself. For so long, he had been in a rush, thinking he had to get everything right immediately. But now, he realized that true success was about continuous growth, not rushing to finish. It was about taking your time. As he thought about the future, Jack no longer felt overwhelmed. He had learned to embrace the unknown. He knew that there would always be more challenges, but now he approached them with a sense of excitement. He didn't need to have everything figured out. Jack smiled to himself. He didn't have to have all the answers, and that was okay. He had learned to trust himself and the process. He knew that as long as he kept showing up, kept putting in the work, everything would fall into place. His journey wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about living authentically and taking each day as it came. Jack had learned that the journey itself, each small victory, each challenge, and each lesson, was what made life truly fulfilling. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city. Jack felt a deep sense of peace. He had come so far, but the road ahead was still open. He didn't know exactly where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready for whatever came next. Jack awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of worry on his shoulders. He had reached a place where he was no longer afraid of new beginnings. He was excited about them. In the past, Jack would have dreaded the unknown. New opportunities made him nervous. The thought of starting something new brought uncertainty. But now, he saw new beginnings as opportunities to create something better, something meaningful. It was time for a change. The promotion Jack had recently received came with more responsibility. While many people would have been intimidated, Jack saw it as a chance to step up. "I've earned this," he thought. The pressure was still there, but he wasn't going to shy away from it anymore. Instead of focusing on the fear of failure, Jack chose to focus on what he had learned. He knew that he wasn't perfect and didn't need to be. He was ready to take on new challenges, knowing he could handle whatever came his way with the same resilience he had built over time. Jack also knew that new beginnings didn't always feel easy. Sometimes, the unfamiliar could be uncomfortable. But the discomfort didn't scare him anymore. It was a signal of growth. He had learned that growth never happened in the comfort zone. The discomfort meant he was moving forward. He spent the morning reflecting on his journey. He had learned to accept change, not resist it. Life was always shifting, and he had to adapt. The old Jack would have feared the unknown, but now he embraced it, knowing that each change brought a chance for growth. At work, Jack began to tackle his new responsibilities with energy and focus. He didn't try to rush through the tasks. He took his time, knowing that consistency was key. With each decision he made, Jack learned more about his strengths and his potential. Instead of obsessing over perfection, Jack now focused on doing his best. It wasn't about being flawless. It was about taking action and learning along the way. With every new project, Jack understood that the process was just as important as the result. One of the hardest lessons Jack had learned was to be patient with himself. As he navigated the new challenges, he reminded himself that growth didn't happen overnight. He had to trust the process. The small steps, the failures, and the wins all mattered. They were all part of the journey. Later that afternoon, Jack made a list of goals for the next few months. These were his next steps, but he no longer saw them as burdens. He saw them as opportunities, an exciting part of his personal growth. It was no longer about avoiding mistakes, but learning from them. Jack realized that new beginnings didn't always come with clear paths. But that wasn't a reason to hesitate. It was a reason to trust himself more. With each new challenge, he had the ability to find his way. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. That evening, Jack felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey wasn't over. It would never truly end. But now, he understood that every new beginning was just another chapter in the story he was writing for himself. And this chapter was just the beginning. The weeks flew by, and Jack found himself back in the thick of things. New projects, deadlines, and the usual pressures that came with the territory. But this time, he approached everything with a different mindset. He understood that persistence was key. In the past, Jack might have cracked under pressure, but now he knew that persistence didn't mean pushing harder or faster. It meant staying committed to the journey, even when the outcome wasn't clear or immediate. It was about showing up day after day. His new role came with added responsibility, and as the work piled up, Jack was faced with the temptation to rush through tasks, hoping to get everything done quickly. But he remembered what he had learned. Consistency was more important than speed. Patience mattered. As Jack worked on multiple projects, he began to see the benefits of persistence. Every small action added up. He focused on the process, not the immediate result. He learned that progress wasn't always visible, but every small step forward was building towards something bigger. There were still moments when Jack felt overwhelmed, when he thought about all the work that lay ahead. But instead of letting the pressure paralyze him, he reminded himself that persistence meant handling what he could, one task at a time. Each step was a victory. Sometimes, Jack would take a step back and reflect on how far he had come. From doubting his ability to now confidently tackling challenges, Jack could see how persistence had shaped his growth. It wasn't always easy, but it had been worth it. The results spoke for themselves. Jack's confidence grew with each passing day. It wasn't because things were perfect, it was because he had learned how to adapt, how to keep moving forward despite setbacks. The lessons weren't always easy, but each one had strengthened his resolve to keep going. The day Jack received a setback in the form of a difficult project review, he didn't let it break his spirit. Instead of letting frustration take over, he looked for the lesson. He knew that every challenge was a chance to improve, and his persistence would eventually lead him to success. As Jack sat at his desk that evening, making plans for the next day, he realized that persistence was something he could count on. It was the foundation of everything he had achieved. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about bouncing back and learning from them. Jack now saw failure not as an obstacle, but as a necessary part of growth. He understood that to persist was to face challenges head-on, to learn from them, and to keep moving forward. The more he practiced this mindset, the stronger he became, both mentally and emotionally. Looking ahead, Jack felt ready. There would always be obstacles, some small, some big, but he knew he had the tools to face them. His confidence wasn't about knowing everything. It was about trusting the process and believing that persistence would carry him through. That evening, Jack reflected in his journal. Persistence isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it feels hard, even when it seems like progress is slow. I'm getting closer to my goals, one step at a time. Jack stood at the window, looking at the city below, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt before. He had come a long way since the days of doubt and fear. The journey had been full of challenges, but it had also been full of growth, learning, and resilience. In the past, Jack had been afraid of the unknown. He worried about failing, about not being good enough, about not having everything figured out. But now, he saw the future as something full of possibility, not something to fear. He had learned that he could handle whatever came his way. The lessons Jack had learned, trusting the process, embracing imperfection, persistence, and self-compassion, were now part of him. They weren't just things he had practiced. They had become his way of life. He no longer needed to search for answers. He was learning to trust himself to find them. He thought back to the times when he felt overwhelmed, the moments when he doubted his ability to keep going. But looking back, he saw how far he had come. The challenges weren't easy, but each one had brought him closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. Jack realized that the journey wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about embracing the process. There would always be more challenges, but each one was an opportunity to grow. He no longer saw obstacles as setbacks, but as opportunities to learn and adapt. That evening, Jack reflected on how much he had changed. He wasn't the same person who had started this journey. He had become more resilient, more confident, and more self-aware. He had learned to face fear, to embrace mistakes, and to keep moving forward, no matter what. His progress had not been immediate or perfect. There had been days when he felt like giving up. But now, he knew that it wasn't about perfection. It was about consistency. Every small step mattered, and every failure was an opportunity to learn and improve. Looking toward the future, Jack didn't have all the answers, and he didn't need them. He knew that life would continue to throw challenges his way, but he also knew that he was equipped to handle them. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Jack smiled at the thought. He had learned that success wasn't just about achieving goals. It was about becoming the kind of person who could handle anything, who could learn from every experience, and who could embrace change with an open heart. He turned from the window, ready to face whatever came next. The world was full of uncertainty, but he no longer saw it as something to fear. With everything he had learned, he knew that he was ready for whatever the future held. The journey continues, Jack wrote in his journal, and I am ready for the next chapter. Whatever happens, I will trust myself, keep learning, and keep moving forward. The road ahead is full of possibility, and I am ready to embrace it.